very much for coming today. This is great. I do want to thank the organizers, Bruce Bullock and Rick Hargoin and Elizabeth Rogers. They and that meetup group. Give them a hand. About my history, but I thought Indians didn't have blonde hair. I've seen some blonde Indians around here. Is that very accurate in history? You know? But there's a lot of our history that I think we have forgotten, and unfortunately, some of the things that we fought for and institutionalized back at the time of the Revolution, I'm afraid we have forgotten about it. And I think that's what this campaign is all about: is to renew our faith and confidence and understanding about our original revolution, what it was all about. And I have never been reluctant to admit that at the beginning I was quite reluctant. I was quite skeptical, and I see a lot of times on campaign trail signs that go up that says that I have removed their skepticism. But let me tell you, you have removed my apathy, and no, you have removed my apathy, and you have helped me get rid of my skepticism. I am much more optimistic now than I was 12 months ago. Campaign, of course, is that there were a lot more people who cared and were concerned, and I really didn't know how many there would be. But the other great thing is how many young people have joined us. That is great. You know, the one admonition I've had as I go around the country, because we've had a lot of enthusiasm like this, is that if you put a lot of work and a lot of energy and time into this, that you ought to do it and you ought to have fun, and it looks like we're having some fun here today. But it is also a little disheartening. You know, sometimes the media doesn't exactly treat us as we would like them to treat us. But, you know, and sometimes they'll say, well, we who believe as we do, we're the radicals and we're on the fringe and we're the extremists. But I think our country has been taken over by the extremists, and we need to get our country back. Great that's happened on the campaign trail is the amount of the enthusiasm and how positive it is. Even though we do talk a lot about our problems are our foreign policy, our economic problems, our monetary problems, the infringements of our personal liberties, and it's a lot of problems that we have to discuss. I mean, yeah, there's so much enthusiasm and it's so positive and everybody's upbeat, and that to me is very, very encouraging. And yeah, at times they will report in the paper, you know, that I think just recently I read, well, the Ron Paul and his people are always so angry and so negative. And I get to thinking, now, isn't it strange? We have an upbeat campaign, a lot of enthusiasm, everything is positive. Somebody coined a term, you know, with the sign, which was not ours, but somebody started it, and they call it the Ron Paul, and they have the love revolution in there. Pretty positive, I would say. Yeah. And, then we talk a lot about hope for America, and it's very positive. And then we talk also about peace and freedom and prosperity, and they turn that into saying that we're all negative. Figure that one out. But no, our message that we're delivering, and the message of freedom. It's a message that has made America great. There's no reason to be negative, and there's no reason to be pessimistic if we do the right things. Now, if we don't do anything, I think we better be concerned, and it could turn into a lot of anger and upset and frustration, and that's what we're trying to prevent. Because if we do nothing, this country is facing some serious problems. We're facing a bankruptcy in this country and the destruction of our dollar. Now that's serious business. But how do you solve that problem? Is it difficult? No. I think an 8th grader has already figured it out a lot better than they have in Washington, D.C. When you need money, you're not allowed to print it. You're not supposed to be able to do that. trouble, and they call it counterfeiting. But here we have been, over these many, many decades, that we've allowed our governments to spend endlessly, run up these deficits, they tax us to the hilt, and then they borrow as much as they can, then they still don't have enough money, and then we allow them, because we have not stood up to them, we have allowed them to just print the money, which is the inflation, which has to be stopped if we want to protect our economy and the value of our dollar. The very first time I ran for office was a long time ago. In 1974, I talked about the monetary issue. I still talk about it, but this is the first time it's gotten significant attention, and it's a significant attention in a national presidential election. We're making progress because it has become so necessary. You can't even open the financial pages today without reading about the falling dollar, the cost of living going up. Just this very week, we saw wholesale prices going up 3% in 1 month, and our retail prices are going up now at a 10% rate, and our government tells us that we only have an inflation rate of 2%. Don't worry about it. But there is reason to worry about it. It's because our government has gotten out of control. We have allowed the spending to excessive means that we have to get it under control. And if you want to deal with the monetary policy, if you want to get rid of the inflation, we have to look to the Constitution. It's not that complicated. The Constitution said only gold and silver can be legal tender, and we're not allowed to print money, which means that we would get rid of the Federal Reserve System. Doesn't come by accident. You know, there was an argument during the Constitutional Convention, very early in our history, between Jefferson and Hamilton. Hamilton wanted the central bank. Right. Jefferson did not. Right. We ended up with the first bank that Hamilton established. Jefferson got rid of it. They got a second bank, and then Jackson got rid of it. Let's look forward to the day that we have another president who will get rid of this central bank. It isn't simply just bad policy and a bad understanding of economics that we have this type of monetary system. This system is devised to serve special interests. It doesn't serve the common man, because the common person, the middle class, if you look at all of history on monetary policy, when you have inflation, when you destroy a currency and you have persistent inflation, you have a very small middle class. You have a huge poor class, and you have a large rich class. And this is what happens. The middle class gets wiped out. People are driven into poverty, and we're in the midst of this now because the average person is having a hard time paying their bills. At the same time, we have more billionaires than ever before. They said, well, there's still no inflation. Yes, there's a lot of inflation. They're putting that money. Go buy gasoline. I think the prices have gone up on gasoline. What about medical care costs? What about education? What about our heating bills? It's endless. Our cost of living is going up. Our government says only 2%. So they give the Social Security beneficiaries 2% raise. At the same time, they're having a 10% increase. So their standard of living has to go down. And that is why people are not feeling good about the economy. And it's not going to get better until we get control of this situation.
Here, here.
1913 wasn't a very good year for our country, and unfortunately we have drifted a long way since that time. But they decided at the time to change the way they would collect revenues. And I would suggest it's about time we repeal 1913, and along with getting rid of the Federal Reserve System, let's get rid of the income tax and the IRS. Is the sinister of all taxation, but it's equivalent to inflation, which is truly a tax. But the income tax is based on the assumption that the government owns our lives and the fruits of our labor, and they allow us to keep a certain percentage. So that is why it is such a bad tax, and also why we don't have control of our lives, we lose our liberties, and then governments go, with the inflation and the taxation system, governments grow. Take a look at the growth of our government since 1913. They created the Depression. It wasn't a function of capitalism that caused the Depression. It was the inflation for World War I. Quite frankly, it was a war we didn't need to be in, and set the standard and set the problems that we are still having today. Then the inflation of the 20s, then we have a depression, and all of a sudden says, oh, see, capitalism fails. What we need is big government, and ushered in, the welfare state. So we've had welfare and warfare for way too long, and we need to repeal both. Challenged on the foreign policy and say, well, it's not a very Republican foreign policy. But that isn't the truth. The truth is that the foreign policy that I talk about is very Republican, it's very American, it's very constitutional. For instance, our president, our current president today, talked the same way in the year 2000. What did he say? No, he said, no policing the world, no, and no nation building, and a humble foreign policy. And I say, that's what we really want, but let's follow through with it. One of the reasons why we've gotten into so many serious problems since World War II, of course, is when it comes to war and foreign policy, we don't follow the Constitution. We haven't once declared war since World War II, and we haven't won one. We should never go to war without a declaration. We should declare it if we have to, and go all out, fight, and win it, and get it over with, and none of these protracted wars. We are told a lot of stories about why we have to go to war. We had to go to war against the Iraqis because they had weapons of mass destruction. It had something to do with 9/11. That was not true. It was never a good reason to go to war. So if it wasn't a good reason to go to war, why isn't that a good reason to come home from that war? We can't leave. If we leave Iraq, there'll be chaos. What do you think we have over in Iraq now? Chaos. But, I remember the 60s rather well. I was in the military. I was drafted during the Cuban crisis. I served in the Air Force for 5 years. Did not have to go. I did not have to go to Vietnam, but it was much on my mind, believe me. And it was told that if we ever left Vietnam, the whole Southeast Asia would go communist. And what happened? We left Vietnam under terrible conditions, and we lost so many men. 60,000 Americans killed over there. After 20 years of killing, the French and Americans killed millions of Vietnamese. And finally, we leave Vietnam. And did it all go communist? Did China take over? No. What happened is Vietnam became westernized. We achieved in peace what we couldn't achieve in war. We did what the founders said. Talk to them. Reason with them. Trade with them. We invest in Vietnam. They come here and travel. The president of Vietnam has been over here. So the proof is there. The founders were correct. We don't have authority to maintain an empire. And it is much better to talk with people. I think it's high time that we start talking to the Cuban people, start trading with people, and going back and forth to Cuba. I think they would be converted to our way. The people who warn us so much about leaving Iraq, and they claim that there'll be such chaos, are the very people who said, well, if we go into Iraq, it will be a cakewalk. They will welcome us with open arms, and it won't take long, and it won't cost anything because the oil will pay for the bills. And now they're warning us there's going to be chaos. Why should we believe them if they were absolutely wrong on the reasons and what would happen if we went into Iraq? But our country country is going bankrupt, but technically it's totally insolvent right now. We have a $9 trillion national debt. We pay $1.4 billion a day just on the interest. That's how hard we have to work just to pay the interest on the national debt. We cannot even maintain the war or our welfare system here without borrowing billions of dollars. Over $800 billion a year we borrow from foreigners in order to subsidize our excessive spending. And that's not going to continue. The Chinese, have they become more militant communists? No, they have softened their stand. They work hard. We buy our stuff from there. They save their money. And they have control of our dollar right now. They can bring us to our knees without firing one shot because they have this control. We're around the world trying to buy up the interest and control the oil supply. We were supposed to be going into Iraq to make sure we could protect our oil. Oil went from $27 to $97 a barrel. That's real good protection. But we now have the Chinese loaning us our money. They're wealthier right now because they have their dollars. Guess what they're buying? They're buying up and making deals with oil and gold. And here we are rejecting that. They have, in a way, are becoming more capitalistic than we are. So we need to get our house in order. We cannot live beyond our means forever. This is the reason why I think the young people are joining this campaign, because they recognize that they are getting a bad deal. They're inheriting this mess, a messy system. And I have an actual reasonable plan where we can solve this problem. But we have to change policy. We need to save a lot of money. And most people say, yeah, that's good. Last week, we were up there debating the budget. And the administration wants a huge increase in the military budget. Not the defense budget, the military budget. And there's a difference. And the Democrats want to have a huge increase in more domestic welfare spending. And they fight and bicker, but they know they have to compromise, so they compromise by increasing both. Make the deficit that much worse. But we need to do the opposite. We need to cut the spending. And my idea about how to cut spending is we need to change foreign policy. It's not in our interest. It's not in our best interest financially or even in our national defense. And there is no doubt in my mind that there is a tremendous incentive for some radical nuts willing to commit suicide terrorism. They come here because we're in their face, on their land, building bases on their country, and it angers them, and they're willing to come over here and do us harm. Changing our foreign policy would greatly reduce that threat to us. $1 trillion a year on our empire. We're in 130 countries. We have 700 bases. We're building 14 permanent bases in Iraq, and we're pretending we're getting ready to leave. We have an embassy over there bigger than the Vatican, cost $1 billion, and we're pretending that we're going to leave. There's no way they'll believe that. What would we think as a people if the Chinese, who look different than us, have a different political system, have a different religious system, and they're stronger than us, and they come into our country and they say, well, we want to protect our oil in the Gulf of Mexico, but we need a few military bases here. I'll tell you one thing that would come of that. It would unify all Americans, Republicans and Democrats, because we'd all be shooting mad by that time. We not understand that when we go into these other countries. One of the main reasons why Osama bin Laden gave a reason for coming over here was the fact that we had bases in Saudi Arabia, and it was considered Holy Land, and this was a motivation for them to come. In the 90s, there was a move on to close bases down here in the United States for fiscal reasons, and I was totally in opposition to that. And yet I am the most conservative member of Congress. I vote against the most spending and the most taxes. But I was opposed to that because it was the principle of the foreign policy that I opposed. Because they weren't really saving money. I didn't like the idea of nickel and diming and closing down a few bases here in this country while building them up overseas. What we need to do is keep our bases here and bring our troops home and have all our troops spend their money here at home rather than in Germany and Japan and around the world. hundreds of billions of dollars. We need a change in foreign policy, not change the management of this particular war. But we need to end what we're doing in the Middle East, and we certainly don't need to start a war with Iran. We just found out they don't have any plans for a weapon. They haven't been working on it for 4 years. So it's time we took off the table this option that we start another war with the Iranians. In order to save the money and change the policy to be more safe and have a stronger national defense, we need to bring the troops home from the Middle East, from Korea, from Japan, and from Europe, from the Philippines. We need to just bring them all home. We as a people have been taxed heavily for this interventionism overseas, and we go and drop a lot of bombs. All through the 90s, we were dropping bombs on the Iraqis. We destroyed their infrastructure, break up their bridges, and break up their highways. We pay for that. And then there's a little bit of calm, and we're back there spending money over there, rebuilding their bridges. I say, let's take care of the bridges here at home. Isn't a choice. If the majority of the American people still want to run the empire, it's not going to happen because we're going broke. All empires end usually not because you're taken over militarily, but it's because a country spends beyond its means. The Soviet system, we didn't have to attack the Soviets. You know, they ask why I don't worry more about the possibility of some third world nation maybe getting a weapon in 10 years from now. Well, going through the 60s and the Cold War and being drafted when they had missiles in Cuba, and the Soviets had 40,000. And we didn't have to fight them. They collapsed because of their economic system. And that's what can happen here. Because we can't afford this. We just can't keep up. We have to get back to production. We're in worse shape than the monetary crisis we had in the 70s because our good jobs are going overseas. We don't produce as much. Our prosperity is dependent on borrowing. And that means it will come to an end. We have to have a new system. And that is the reason that if we save enough money from all the expenditures overseas, enough that I believe we really can take care of those who have become dependent, the elderly, dependent on medical care and Social Security, which they were promised they would get it back. The only way we can do that without raising taxes is by saving money someplace. I am so confident that that would work if we would do it, that we could allow the next generation to look at it and say, look, here's a chance. If you'd like, let you get out of Social Security. What governments have done throughout the centuries in order to get the people to go along with the removal of their freedoms is there has to be a tremendous amount of fear built up. And after 9/11, a lot of fear and a lot of sacrifice of our liberties. Fear that somebody might have a weapon someday. Fear that, that if you don't have the government there as a safety net, we're all going to suffer. Nobody would take care of themselves. There would be no medical care. That is all concocted fear. But one of the things that they have done since 9/11 is build this tremendous fear without explaining why, we were attacked. Instead it said, oh, they come here because we're free and prosperous. We can't solve that problem if we think that is the reason. Let me tell you, it seems like if they believe that, they might undermine our freedom and our prosperity, and maybe they won't come. But that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But it was used because some of the legislation passed after 9/11 had been on the books. I mean, it had been prepared, and they used it as an opportunity to come in and pass the Patriot Act. I see no benefits to you or to any American to have had passed the Patriot Act because you have lost your Fourth Amendment of rights with the Patriot Act. Not only have we lost the right of our privacy in our homes and in our businesses, but we're losing it on the internet as well, all because of this fear that is built up. And they have changed the laws under Posse Comitatus and the Insurrection Act, which means that it is very easy today for a president to declare a national emergency for some things just for health reasons and weather reasons rather than true insurrection. So it's been made very, very easy with the Military Commissions Act. It has been established in law. It had been done by the administration, and the Congress complied with it. And what they have said is the President or the Attorney General can declare an American citizen an enemy to combatant. If you are declared an enemy combatant, either because you look like you might be one or you talk to one even by accident on a telephone, if you are declared an enemy combatant, you can be taken and put in a secret prison and actually tortured and not given the proper protection of habeas corpus. We have drifted a long way. This trend is very dangerous. We have to reverse that trend. You know, the other principle that we have to defend, and I'm a strong believer in the right of national sovereignty, we ought to be doing a lot better jobs protecting our borders rather than worrying about the borders around the world. Some of the problems that we have today with illegal aliens has been created by our mismanagement. First off, if you ever subsidize something, you get more of it. And I think we literally have subsidized illegality in immigration, because there's always this promise that there will be amnesty, promise that there will be citizenship just by having a baby, by stepping over the border. And if you come here and you know there's amnesty coming, why not come? You get free education and free medical care and free food stamps. It's the wrong incentives. It isn't, the policy we have shouldn't be anti-immigrant. It should be, let's have a free enough economy, let's make sure that we have no illegal immigration, but then let's have a sensible immigration policy and allow people to come under the law. That's what we need. Unfortunately, the leadership of both parties in Washington aren't too concerned about our borders. They talk a little bit about it and do very little. And one of the reasons is that many of them strongly endorse the notion of a North American Union. I think we should object to and prevent the North American Union. And we don't need a NAFTA highway running from Mexico to Canada. Domain, which has been grossly distorted. They're talking about eminent domain confiscation of millions of acres up through the center of this country, and we don't need that. We need to revive the interest and the understanding of what private property is all about. I think we have lost that. We, on today's circumstances, I think we are more like we pay rent for our property, and we pay the rent, and then they tell it if we want to use it, we don't get permission, or we struggle to get permission what we can do with it. And then if they don't want to take it from us, they take it from us through eminent domain. But the principle of private property has been severely undermined. The idea of private contracts and private property is the essence of free markets. We're supposed to have voluntary contracts between people, socially as well as economically. And that means that we should be allowed to lead our lives as we so choose, and the government should butt out unless people start hurting somebody else or taking somebody's property. The government's supposed to protect that, not to damage it. They're supposed to give us honest money, but they give us bad money. We have this thing turned upside down. The government's supposed to protect our privacy, but they protect government secrecy.
Right.
We need an open government to know what our government is doing all the time. The wonderful part about the campaign, and as I mentioned earlier, is the enthusiasm and the positive nature of the campaign, because if we do the right things, it's not going to be that difficult. We're in better shape than the Soviets ever were because they didn't have our traditions. We have the traditions of sound money and property and voluntary contracts and freedom. And although we've lost it, it isn't going to be that difficult to bring back if we're serious about it. It isn't going to be completely new. But the wonderful thing about the campaign has been there has been so many people who have known about this. I did not know or realize and was skeptical about how big the remnant would be. It's bigger than I ever dreamed. And as the young people come in, to me it's so positive because people come together and the people are different. The crowds are always different because they might want freedom for a different reason. Somebody might say, I want my freedom and I know you understand the Second Amendment. Somebody else might say, well, I want to homeschool my kids and I know you understand that. And I know you want low taxes and I want my religious value. So there's all different reasons. We don't all agree on what we want to do with our lives or with our money. But freedom brings us together. Right. Socialism and welfarism does exactly the opposite. Yeah. It divides us. Right. Because finally the economy gets weak and a country gets poorer. The government's involved in all the distribution, so we become more aggressive trying to get our money back from the government. So what have we created in this country? A huge, horrendous lobbying system where they literally spend hundreds of millions of dollars going up to Washington. So who is it that needs more health care? You know, when they come up with prescription drug program, you think it's the poor people coming for these benefits? No, it's the drug companies coming for lobbying for it. Our medical care system has been taken over by the corporations. We have lost the doctor-patient relationship. We have destroyed this principle that patients can make choices, picking their doctors and picking the type of medicine they want. I think we should have absolute protection of alternative health care. We don't want the WTO controlling our vitamins and nutrition. Victor Hugo said that armies cannot stop an idea whose time has come.
That's right.
And I think that the idea of liberty is not brand new, but it has been restored and the time has come, and I don't think there's any stopping that movement right now. Remember where our liberties come from. They don't come from government. Our life and our liberties come from our Creator. The purpose of the government is to be limited to the protection of those liberties. The purpose of liberty, from my viewpoint about life, is that it gives us the opportunity to work and strive for excellence and virtue. Governments can't do that. Yes, we'll give freedom to people, and sometimes they'll mess up their lives. But if we give it to the government, they want to mess up all our lives. Freedom does mean, and it doesn't work unless we assume responsibility for ourselves. And sometimes people have a tough time. But that means that if everybody took care of themselves, that would remove a lot of need for help. But there will be some. But then there are families, then there are friends, and then there are churches, then there are communities, then there's local government. Yeah. A long time before we have to go to the federal government and adopt programs that are unconstitutional and look to the United Nations to run our lives. I say, let's look to ourselves to defend our liberties, assume the responsibilities for us, and restore the greatness of the revolution that was once started and with which we have been blessed. We have had the greatest benefit of any country in the world, but we have lost our confidence. We're afraid too often that it won't work. But freedom really does work, and we want to come and move this forward. They claim we want to go backwards, back to the gold standard, back to ancient times. But believe me, freedom is a modern new idea. Yeah. What is ancient is tyranny. We must reject tyranny, understand how liberty works, understand how markets work, and restore this movement toward defending liberty and defending the principles that have made this country great. I thank you very much for coming.